And we're live. Hi, ma'am. How you doing today?
Oh, I'm fantastic. How are you? You look very official. What are you doing here?
Oh, that's right. I'm with the government.
Oh, wow. Very nice to meet you.
Great to meet you. Hey, I noticed your crack pipe looked a little dirty there. Would you like a brand new one for free?
You would give me one for free?
Oh,
a new
yeah.
one?
Yeah, and we're actually prioritizing people of color and minorities.
I'm very high right now, but let me get this straight. The government wants to give me a clean crack pipe to smoke out. Not that I smoke crack, but if I did, you'd give me a clean one?
That is correct. Absolutely.
I mean, I promise I don't smoke crack. I've never even heard
Oh,
of
we
her.
don't really care.
Never met her.
We just want to make sure you have a clean one.
I'll take it just to see it.
Just to see it. All right, here you go. Happy smoking.
Thank you, Daddy Government. I really appreciate it. Guys, welcome to Will and Amala Live. We made up that skit 2 minutes before going live, so it's surprisingly accurate. But before we get into the stories of government-subsidized crack pipes,
It's just funny to say.
it is really...
Absurd.
It is so absurd that these words are coming out of my mouth. But we'll get to that story. But first, you guys have missed Will. He's been in Europe. You haven't seen him on the show as often. I think he's only been on the show a couple of times. But today, Will has given you an update from Amsterdam. Here's that video for you guys.
Hallo. That's Dutch for hello in America. So giving you guys a little fun fact. I am here in Amsterdam right now. I have about 3 days left on my trip. After I finish up here in Amsterdam, I'm going to St. Louis and doing a Blexit event with Candace Owens, which is going to be a great time. And I just wanted to come for the show, give you guys a little update on what I've been doing. I got back from Monaco, Monte Carlo in Monaco a couple of days ago. Back here to Netherlands, was in Romania before that. Before that was in Budapest, and before that I flew into Amsterdam. And so a couple things that I wanted to talk about here with you guys. Firstly, I did a reel that we posted on Instagram in Romania talking about this Che Guevara cafe, and you guys have been following me on social media. You see that I've been all over Europe and all this kind of stuff. And so I'm getting so many people coming and saying, Will, you lied. How could you get into Europe without being vaccinated? You can't go into Europe without being vaccinated. It's the only way. And so I can understand why people would say that. But if you go onto the Dutch website, you're going to see very clearly that there are exemptions to fly into the Netherlands being unvaccinated. And so I got one of those exemptions. I got a work permit to come out to the Netherlands to work, which is what I've been doing. I went and I gave a speech in Hungary. I've done a lot of radio interviews, all sorts of stuff. Did a speech in Romania along with other interviews. It's been a lot of work. Despite me somewhat being on vacation, I've still done a lot of work as well. So I got this highly skilled migrant work permit, essentially. That is the exemption that has got me into Europe so that I didn't have to be vaccinated, okay? And then secondly, people are asking, well, once you're in Europe, how are you going to all around these other countries? If you got the work permit for the Netherlands, how did you go to Romania or Hungary or France or Monte Carlo or wherever it is? And the only way that you can get into those other countries is with negative tests. In Europe, they call it the green pass, right? The green pass. And so then when you have the green pass, you can go and travel to all these places. And so as an American, I could have had a vaccination record, I could have had a negative test, or a recovery certificate. I didn't have any of the other two, so I only had the negative test. So basically, I've had one of those things, those cotton swabs, stuck up my nose every single day for the past 2 weeks. It's been terrible to have to do, but it's been worth it to be able to go around all over to see Europe and all these different things and report it back to you guys. Secondly, one thing, this is what I'm going to make something about on Instagram and post this around and talk about this a little bit more. But that when we're in America, when I'm in Los Angeles, right, and I have to go into a restaurant or to the grocery store or a hardware store, whatever it is, there is a mandate that says I have to wear a mask. There is a vaccine passport requirement that is also a mandate. But here, in many of the countries in Europe, these are not mandates, these are laws. In Monaco, when we were walking around going to this castle and to the Palais du Prince. That's horrible French, I understand. But we're going and doing all these things. It is required by law for you to wear your mask outside. Okay, so there are police officers who are stationed all across the country, all across the city, looking at people and telling you to put on your mask outside. Now, we still obviously didn't do it, really. I'm not going to think I'm going to wear my mask outside. You got another thing coming. You got to be kidding me. But everywhere we go and we saw police officers, they would ask us to put our mask on outside. It is actually required by law. In America, because under the Emergency Use Authorization, you have the right to refuse. It is right there in the U.S. Code. It says that you have the right to refuse one of these things. Whereas here in Europe, in many of these European countries, you do not have that right. You do not have the right to refuse. This thing is a law. It is a law for you to wear your mask outside. When we went to a hotel in Romania, we had to have negative tests to check into the hotel. To check into the hotel in Monaco, we had to have negative tests. All these different types of laws that are there, put in place, that you do not have in America. So, it seems like in America, when we're talking about all these mandates and restrictions and all this kind of stuff, it's really bad. And of course, it is really bad. There shouldn't be a mandate whatsoever, regardless. But just be glad that you live in America, where these things are not laws, where you will not be automatically fined for not wearing a mask or not having a vaccine or a green certificate or a recovery pass for going out in any of these places. It's a lot different than it is in the United States. And I think that a lot of the times in America, we take it for granted. I think that, this trip for the last 2 weeks, I've been all over Europe, all over different countries, in all the different airports, Germany, France, Romania, almost got stopped by Romanian border control as well, Hungary, Amsterdam, all over the place, right? I've been all over, and I've learned so much of how these places work, how they're different than America, and the restrictions that they have. And I can tell you this as someone who has dealt with Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, all the worst leftist places. It is much worse here in Europe. Sorry to say that. It is much worse here in Europe for the restrictions and the COVID stuff than it is in America at all. Even in the worst places in America, it is worse here in Europe. So just thinking about that, don't take these types of freedoms that we have in America for granted. I know that now that I've been on this trip, I am not going to, and I'm going to continue to fight and continue to do the things that I do to make sure that we don't turn into somewhere like Romania or Monaco or France where they have these types of restrictions and laws. I'm going to do everything in my power to keep fighting. So with that being said, guys, I'll be back next Monday on the show. Finally, be back. I'll probably be horribly jet lagged, I'm sure. The first week, or maybe first, 4 days? 4 days being here in Europe was terrible for me. I felt awful with the jet lag. It's a 9-hour difference from Los Angeles to Amsterdam, and I was exhausted. I wasn't really eating. It just wasn't good. It just wasn't good whatsoever. But now I feel fine. Now I'm back on the right schedule, but I know as soon as I leave, I'm going to feel terrible again when I get back. But we'll be there for the show next Monday, and can't wait to be back with all you guys. I miss America, but I've had a wonderful time here regardless. Europe is a great place. I've had a really good time, especially here in Amsterdam with my girlfriend Ava and all the fun stuff we've done and everything. She's not ready, so she doesn't want to come be on camera. But eventually, you guys, you'll see her. You'll see some pictures or something on my social media. But anyway, guys, we're going to wrap it up here, and I'll see you next week. All right, peace.
All right, there's your update from the one and only William Witt. Like you said, he's going to be back Monday for you guys, so we're excited to have the gang back together, looking forward to it, and I hope you guys are looking forward to that as well. Now let's get into some other stories today, and let me just give you an overview of the things we're going to go over. The World Economic Forum put out a video on critical race theory, which is exceptionally insane, and we'll get into why. We've been having fact checks pop up about this current administration, subsidizing crack pipes for people, which we will talk about. We're also going to be talking about Adele being slammed on the internet for going to a gender-neutral award show and saying that she loves being a woman. Plus, we have Trevor Noah's commentary on Joe Rogan. Prince Harry saying that he takes 30 to 45 minutes a day to sort of settle himself and get away from the feeling of burnout. We have Jim Jones, who's a rapper who had bad customer service at Gucci and is crying racism currently. And we have the Super Bowl snack tier list, which you guys suggested on the stream on the Will and Amala Live channel. We took your suggestions in the comments, which if you're not subscribed, go subscribe to Will and Amala Live on YouTube. And we're going to be doing a Super Bowl snack tier list, so you guys know what we're going to be eating during the Super Bowl.
Very important.
It's very, very important. You know, you got to keep things light while all of this stuff is happening in the background. Now let's get into this critical race theory video from the World Economic Forum. I should preface this by saying if you're not familiar with the World Economic Forum, I would take a moment to go and look it up, not during the show, but after, and see what they're all about. A lot of people are speculating that the World Economic Forum is greatly centered around the Great Reset. It's not really speculative. They're very open about the fact that they believe in a Great Reset, which is really this entire restructuring of the world and our economy through a globalist lens. And I can't get too deep into it. We could probably spend an entire show, an entire week of shows talking about the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, what the Great Reset is, and how all of these different governments across the world are playing a role in this and meeting together to discuss it. But let's talk about their view on critical race theory first. Let's watch this video. What is critical race theory and why is it so controversial? Supporters of CRT say it's a way to understand and tackle racial inequality. However, opponents say CRT does the opposite. So what is CRT? The theory was first developed by U.S. legal scholars in the 1980s. It argues that the laws, rules, and regulations that govern society today have been shaped by the historical subordination of people of color, and that this is a driving force behind racial inequality today. Take the U.S. criminal justice system, for example. While everyone is seen as equal under the law, Black Americans are imprisoned at 5 times the rate of white people. CRT says this disparity is a legacy of America's racist past. Opponents argues that this paints all white people as bigots. But to supporters of CRT, this misses the point. They say a system doesn't need racists working within it to produce racially imbalanced outcomes. Law professor Mari Matsuda was an early developer on this. She says the problem is not bad people, but a system that produces bad outcomes. CRT is usually taught at the graduate level, but 14 U.S. states have banned CRT from their classrooms, while lawmakers in 16 more states hope to follow suit. Supporters of CRT argue it's a lens through which to view racial inequality today. Most importantly, it recognizes that racism is not a relic of the past, and that by understanding its underlying causes, we can start to build a more just society. What do you think about CRT? I'm so glad that they set us up for that. There's so much stated in this video that I think we need to go and break down. CRT, yes, is a legal theory that was developed in the 1980s. I want to think of some of the major names behind this. Jean Sablajic, Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw. I believe she's more of a modern day critical race theorist. Who else? Richard Delgado is a name that you can look up if you want to look up some of the early sort of, maybe we'll call them fundamentalist critical race theorists or critical race purists as far as the theory goes. But yes, it was a law theory developed that says that we should look at American laws and legislation through the lens of race because racism is sort of baked into these laws being created and the systems and institutions in this country. Now, there's more to critical race theory than just that. There are several tenets of critical race theory that you can go and look into. Tenets like meritocracy being an extension of white supremacy, which is utterly ridiculous, or whiteness being used as property, or the idea of intersectionality, that we have multiple identities that are sort of intertwined, which I somewhat agree with, and race being a social construct, another thing that I completely agree with. But most of the tenets of critical race theory are completely unfounded and go to promote what I would call a racist narrative. Another tenet of critical race theory is that colorblindness is actually a harmful view to have, that we shouldn't be focused on race neutrality, but actually racially forward thinking, where we put race as a priority in the way that we look at the world. So yes, critical race theory is probably not the best way to view specifically America, a country built on the idea that people of all races, religions, and creeds can live in this country together under united values. Now, They will paint this as if critical race theory is not being taught in schools. You can see that in sort of the subtext of this video here, but it very much is. What is happening is that this legal theory that has now become very commonplace and people have been talking about has been distilled down to a level of K through 12 learning so that these young children can start to get the baseline of what critical race theory is, and then they build upon that. That's why we're seeing young kids in schools being separated into affinity groups based on race, where they can have discussions about race. We have kids ranking themselves based on power and privilege in school. We have conversations about whiteness and how whiteness comes with inherent bias. We have schools that are lowering academic standards for all students because they think that people of color are disproportionately affected by these things. And that plays off of what I just said, meritocracy being an extension of white supremacy, according to critical race theory. So it's quite obvious that this is being taught in our schools.
Yeah, it's obvious that it's being taught in our schools, and it's also obvious that this is essentially a different spin on Marxism. It's race Marxism, and James Lindsay talks about this, and I think it's really helpful to think of it in these terms, that back in the OG Marxism, it was all about economic class, workers of the world unite, and all of the unrest that workers were experiencing was what these early Marxists were trying to tap into in order to do what? In order to usher in a communist revolution.
Yep.
Nowadays, the critical race theorists early on saw that and they saw the failure of that early form of communism with trying to unite the workers, and then they looked at what was going on in the world in the 1960s with all of the racial turmoil in the civil rights movement and such, and they were like, oh, here's another group that we can agitate and cause division with and create enough unrest in order to usher in that's the same type of revolution toward a utopia. And even in this video, it talks about how we can make a more just world. And that's what proponents of critical race theory say. And you talked about this a little on the show yesterday, but it's like, if you ask these people, where is it going? They can speak in very like abstract terms about equity and things like that, but there's never any clear vision of what type of society that they're trying to build, other than it's just this utopia, and it's Marxist.
It is. I'm trying to think of other points in this video that we can go through and debunk. They talked about the criminal justice system here in America, and saying that black people are 5 times more likely, I believe. Let me find the actual stat they give. Yeah, black Americans are imprisoned at 5 times the rate of white people. What this fails to take into account, again, and whenever we have these discussions about policing or sentencing or the likelihood of being imprisoned, we never take into account, number one, the major thing, class. Class is something that we should definitely be talking about when it comes to this. People of lower socioeconomic status are far more likely to be imprisoned, far more likely to have higher sentencing, far more likely to have run-ins with police officers. So that's one thing that we should be discussing. Also, the rate of criminality within these different populations. The black population here in America, unfortunately, has quite a high rate of criminality, and it's not the entire black population. A lot of you will hear that stat about 13% of the population, 50% of the homicides. A lot of people throw that out, and I, in the past, arguing this, I have used that statistic. But really, when we look at it, it's not 1350. It's about 2.650. It's particularly the young black male population that has a quite high rate of criminality, but also a high rate of being on the lower end of the socioeconomic status ladder. So these are things that we should be discussing. And because we are so quick to jump to the word racism, we leave out the actual discussions we should be having about class, about having 2 parents, about whether or not you have a quality education, whether or not you have access to resources where you live. Geography is such a massive part of this discussion as well. And by talking about race and making that the only thing that we focus on, we completely lose our way in talking about these issues, because that's all you're going to ever talk about. And obviously nothing that the political left has done to combat racism, as they say, has been successful in changing the outcomes. And this has been a discussion we've been having for decades. So if the discussion has been focused on race for decades, and you are trying to move the needle here, and they have been moving the needle, we've seen how extreme it's gotten, yet these disparities are not being cleared up. Nothing is changing. Black people are still disparately impacted by these things. Clearly, we're having the wrong